Welcome back, friends. And today, JW World News takes us to the Washington state. So here we are in North America. And the news is talking about clergy status and not reporting, so mandatory reporting. So, in a lot of parts of the world, in most parts of the world, mandatory reporting is how CSA cases are handled. And here in Canada, you must report child abuse and neglect, and it's part of a Child Welfare and Family Services Act that started in 1985 in this country, in Canada. So the Child and Family Services Authorities Act establishes authorities that are responsible for administering and providing for the delivery of child and family services. So this is being fought all around the world when it comes to mandatory reporting, when it comes to CSA. So today we're going to zoom in here to the Washington state, and this is where the today's news is coming from. Now, today's news is based on 3 articles. This has been an ongoing news for a while. It's been so Jehovah's Witnesses have been involved in legal battles all over the world. So here we're zooming into the Washington state, and the question is, why aren't clergy members obliged to report abuse in the Washington state? So this article takes a look at this. This is from October 26th, 2022. And that's when this news was started, but it doesn't mean that it wasn't legally being battled. And we're going to learn about this. The next article is Washington lawmakers propose bill requiring clergy to report child abuse, citing Investigate West reporting. And this was January 18th, 2023. So we're going to take a look at that article. And so the lawsuits have been going on, or the legal battles have been going on. And finally, in May 4th, this is just the other day, 2023 at 11:49, update. Washington's bill to require clergy to report child abuse dies after Catholics refuse compromise on the confessions. So here we have the Jehovah's Witnesses and the Catholics teaming up, or the Jehovah's Witnesses teaming up with the Catholics in this state and winning. And this is what's interesting. We're going to do another video on this, on the Jehovah's Witness claiming clergy. We're going to go to their website, and we're going to see how they're now tailoring their training and their website for pastoral care. And they want to fit into the category of clergy because they can fall in under the Catholics, the priests, and the confession, and they want to keep confession private. So even when it comes to child CSA cases. So for most of the world, we think that's completely wrong. We think that the child's welfare, the crime that's associated, and these are crimes associated with CSA, that they should be reported on immediately to the authorities. And that's how it is here in Canada and for many other parts of the world. But here in Washington, they're fighting this still. So let's take a look at the first article. The first article, why aren't clergy members obliged to report abuse in Washington? Good question. Since 2003, there has been many bipartisan support among legislators to patch the state's mandatory report law exemption. And here's a picture of Maria Hughes, and she's suing Jehovah's Witnesses for failing to protect her from Elihu Rodriguez, who pledged guilty to felony child rape in 2019 and was ordered to serve 5 years in prison. Hughes had met him at the South Spanish congregation in Milton, Washington. So she's the victim. So here we go in the story. Nearly 20 years ago, in the aftermath of the Catholic sexual abuse scandal, former Washington State Rep. Mary Lou Dickerson wanted to make sure child sexual abuse could not be hidden so easily by church leaders. In Washington, clergy, unlike teachers, physicians, and law enforcement, were not listed as mandatory reporters of child abuse or neglect. Dickerson D. Seattle introduced a bill that would have changed that. I really wanted to have a law that was as strong as possible that would require clergy to report abuse, Dickerson tells Investigation West today, and that I was concerned about children. But each attempt failed. The closest any version came in 2005 when the bill that would have compelled clergy to report sexual abuse passed the state house unanimously. However, a watered down version still couldn't make it out of the state Senate committee. No similar bill has been proposed since, and Washington to this day still has one of the nation's weakest mandatory report laws as it applies to clergy. And they have next here a Jehovah's Witness church cover up child sex abuse, survivor says. So without a law listing clergy as mandatory reporters, church leaders can hide sexual abuse from authorities and allow predators to continue to abuse children. Examples have occurred all over the country involving a variety of religions. Last month, Investigate West examined multiple lawsuits claiming that Jehovah's Witness elders in Washington knew of sexual abuse allegations but did not alert law enforcement, resulting in more children being abused. If elders had been required by law to report to authorities, other children may not have been abused, said Stephen Reich, an attorney with Seattle-based the attorney's law, representing the victim. Goes on to say, if the priority we place is on the protection of children, then I think clergy should be mandatory, reports Reich. Washington's atypical law. Each state has its own requirements dictating who must report suspected child abuse or neglect to authorities. 43 states list clergy as mandatory reporters, either explicitly or under a broader definition, according to a federal agency that tracked the state laws in 2019. But of those, 31 what's called clergy penitent privilege, a loophole that exempts clergy from the requirement if the information was learned from someone seeking spiritual advice or during confession. And if you're not sure what they're talking about in the Catholic religion, you can go to a confession box and talk to a priest if you committed a sin or something's bothering you. Washington's law is unique in a few ways. It's one of the 7 states that does not list clergy as mandatory reporters of child abuse or neglect at all. And of those 7, only Washington and Alaska also protect clergy penitent privilege. That means clergy in Washington have no obligation to make a report when they suspect child abuse or neglect, and they are exempt from being examined in court for any confession made in confidence. It doesn't seem like that protects the child. And that's why this is being disputed. Washington does specify that clergy may elect to report child abuse or neglect without fear that they will be sued for divulging information said in confidence. But lawmakers and child advocates argue that if it's left up to choice, too many church leaders will opt to hide allegations of sexual abuse. Jehovah's Witness elders, for example, are instructed to call headquarters in New York first when they are told of sexual abuse involving a member of the church. Headquarters will instruct them to call law enforcement if law explicitly compels them to report it. So Jehovah's Witnesses are looking for loopholes. In Montana, a woman who accused the Jehovah's Witnesses national organization of ordering clergy not to report her abuse to authorities was awarded a $35 million judgment in 2018. But the state Supreme Court reversed that judgment because though clergy are mandatory reporters of child abuse, the state law contains the clergy penitent loophole. Now, just so if you're watching, the Jehovah's Witnesses do not go through the same training as a typical priest or clergy member does. The Jehovah's Witnesses have ordained ministers that could be 12 or 13 years old, young children. And an ordained minister to a Jehovah's Witness is sitting in the front row. Well, they go over 200 questions in a book, and they do have a study program. But at the end of the day, they get baptized and they become an ordained minister. And now that puts them on the same class as a pastor. Or are they referring to elders? You see, in the Jehovah's Witness religion, they feel that everyone is a pastor. So that, I think, needs much dispute. Now, it goes on to say, if an abuser admits that he touched a child, this is considered confidential by church elders, and they use every possible avenue to keep it confidential and not report it to the law enforcement, said Mark O'Donnell, a former Jehovah's Witness who now acts as a consultant in sexual abuse cases against the church, or against the king, against the Watchtower. Now, other religious organizations have directed church leaders to hide sexual abuse allegations too. In Arizona, as an Associate Press detailed in August, Mormon church lawyer and Utah Republican Rep. Merrill Nelson told a Mormon bishop that Arizona state law requires the bishop to keep abuse allegations confidential. That wasn't the case. Arizona, like Montana, lists clergy as mandatory reporters, though it also has the clergy penitent loophole. Without the allegations being reported to authorities, the alleged rapist continues the abuse of kids for years after. And this is the problem. In the recent lawsuits against Jehovah's Witnesses in Washington, elders were alleged to have been told of abuse in some cases by parents, not through confession or other privileged communication. The elders may have been required to report if they were listed in the state law as mandatory reporters, since the clergy penitent privilege would not have applied. Reich said there's no reason clergy shouldn't be required to report in those instances. I think that could have an effect in stopping abuse earlier, Reich said. Washington tried to change the law earlier. A handful of states have successfully closed the clergy penitent loophole, but some 130 proposed bills amending mandatory reporter laws in other states failed in recent decades, the AP reported in September, finding that the Roman Catholic Church, the Mormon Church, and Jehovah's Witnesses have lobbied against the bills. Now, I'm going to stop there. We have a petition in this video, if you go to the bottom, in Canada, to stop charities to organizations that discriminate. And that would include all of these religions. They discriminate in so many different ways. So if you're Canadian, you haven't already signed it, please take a look at it. We'd appreciate it. So we're carrying on. Washington lawmakers, including Dickinson and former state Senate Jen Cole Wells, proposed 5 bills from 2003 to 2005 that would have strengthened requirements for clergy to report suspected child abuse, according to a historical search by the Washington Democrats. The first, proposed by Cole Wells in 2003, would have removed the clergy penitent loophole, but would have added clergy as the mandatory reporters. A similar bill introduced by the House passed vote, but could not get out of Senate. And the next year, they proposed a bill that would have required clergy to report when there's reasonable cause established, and it failed to get out of the House. So, this has been going back and forth. And it goes on to say, the bills at times had bipartisan support. Dickinson remembers some Republicans feared that the new law would open communication with clergy and churches. And that was their primary concern. So it's quite involved to pass these laws. It goes on to say, in Catholicism, confession is an important piece of their religion. The opposition was enough to mean that these bills didn't have the support to make it through. Other religions may not see it the same way. This guy talks about it. He would tend to err on the side of reporting to authorities rather than handling it internally. His perspective, however, is partly shaped by the fact that the denomination is the owner of the Lutheran Community Services, a non-for-profit providing victim advocacy for survival of sexual abuse. So he says we're the owner of an agency where social workers do all of this work, and we tend to trust them. And that's often not true of other religious organizations. So in some churches, some religious organizations, they have social workers, they have family counselors, and they handle sexual abuse in a completely different way. And all of these discussions have to come up through the court processes. So that's kind of the end of that one. It was a long one. Then it takes us to the Washington lawmakers propose a bill requiring clergy to report child abuse. So this goes on, and it looks like they were successful, but not. So I don't know how much of this we want to read. In the 2000s, the state lawmakers proposed several bills that would have added clergy to the mandatory reporter list, but none of those bills became law. The Associated Press reported last year that while a handful of states have successfully strengthened clergy reporting requirements, some 120 proposed bills amending mandatory reporter laws failed due to part to resistance from the Roman Catholic Church, the Mormon Church, and the Jehovah's Witnesses. So I think that's the important thing that we want to take home here is the Roman Catholic Church, the Mormon Church, and the Jehovah's Witnesses have all sided together in wanting to hide sexual abuse within their organization, not wanting to have to report these crimes. So I guess my question, having been a Jehovah's Witness, I was in the organization for 30 years, why would anybody want to hide crimes within a religion? It doesn't make sense. Not to me. Now here's a picture of a guy, Derek Terrell's 2022 lawsuit, and this is recent, against Jehovah's Witnesses, filed in Spokane, joins a growing mountain of cases alleging the church conceals sexual abuse. And it goes on to say, and this is his words, hopefully this will bring other people forward and they can find healing in this, says Terrell, 57. So there's an ex-Jehovah's Witness that could use some support in fighting the Jehovah's Witnesses. So across the country, 43 states list clergy as mandatory reporters, according to a federal agency that tracked the state laws in 2019. Of those, most have what's called clergy penitent privilege, a loophole that exempts clergy from reporting suspected abuse if the information was learned from someone seeking spiritual advice or during confession. So why are we allowing clergy? Why are we allowing the religions? And we see that the Jehovah's Witnesses are grouped in with the Mormons and the Roman Catholic Church. And if we follow the Bible and we follow the very scriptures that the Jehovah's Witnesses throw out about Babylon the Great falling and all of these things, well, here we see that they're all grouping together. And they're all grouping together on a crime, on hiding a crime, on hiding child sexual abuse, CSA cases that were reported directly to the elder body or to a Catholic church or to a Mormon bishop. So all over the world, we're granting these people the ability to hide crimes under the umbrella of God, under the umbrella of religion, belief in God, in this book they call the Bible. And then they expect us to put faith in the Bible and to put faith in them as religions? I don't think so. I think we as a race of people all over the earth have got to a point where enough is enough. These religions are falling, and we have to recognize that if we keep supporting them, we stop them from falling. So we just let them fall and let them crumble because of their own stupidity, their own disgust in hiding child sexual abuse. That's what they're fighting for, all of these religions, these three religions listed here. So that's the message I think we should take home from all of this. And the next part is Washington's bill to require clergy to report child abuse dies after Catholics refuse compromise on confession. So it's a short article, but we basically covered it. Yeah, the Catholics are fighting this with the Mormons and the Jehovah's Witnesses. They're all in the same kettle. They're all part of the Babylon that's going to fall if that's how we would read their Bible. And they all read the same Bible. So all of this stuff cannot exist for too much longer. So, folks, it isn't. This is one state out of the whole wide world, but this state is now being looked at by the whole world, and we're all wondering, and we're all looking at Washington State, and we're wondering how backwards can they be by allowing, and all of the states that are allowing loopholes in mandatory reporting. There should be zero loopholes. And that's what we're fighting for here in Canada, and that's what we have to fight for in the US. And if you're not a part of this yet, there's a Be Free 2023. There's a protest, a legal protest set up October 31st this year. And it's to protest this, to protest things like this. So you'll see a link to it on the description on the website below. Go to their website, Be Free 2023, and you can get all the details there. So that's about all we're going to report on for today, folks. And until next time, keep living your life with love. Thanks again.